Hello there. At 3 o'clock in the morning, in the middle of a eclipse, and my heart is heavy. I'm feeling a lot of suffering and pain of being a man, of being human, of trying to love others. There's a lot of stuff bubbling up that makes me frustrated, angry, and extremely sad. I'm going to share some things that I haven't really shared openly in my life. I've always thought I was broken and something wrong with me, or told I was that. And I'm sitting here with it, and I want to be free of it. I want to move through it, and I want to be worthy. I want to feel safe in being myself and not feel blamed or broken or smashed. Or there's a lot of ugliness in me trying to be loved and interrelating with other people for love. And I know it's not about trying to be loved, but it was kind of created right from the moment I was born. I spent the first 30 years of my life as not even feeling comfortable relating with women, just trying to be a good man and figure out how to meet the expectations, etc., that the world has of men, and especially for women asking for men, how does sexuality work and how do you get there, and religion and all these kind of things all made this really mangled mess. Basically, I married the first person that I dated and had sexuality with, and it all felt good and right, and there was a bunch of soul contract in there. I had 3 beautiful children with my wife. But during that experience, I found out that my wife had a bunch of abuse, and sexuality was something that was being done to please me and as a marriage obligation. But it scared her, and it was kind of a very hard experience to be able to find that with this person that you're loving and respecting, and them not being able to share, not being able to speak about it, not being able to do anything but projecting that fear back on me as unworthiness or my body shame or a whole bunch of other things. And it became a very toxic experience over time, because it was told that it was something wrong with me, but it was actually something going on with her. And she would never speak of it, and no matter how hard I tried to heal it, to help move through it, it was this unspoken thing. And it ate at my self-esteem, it ate at my self-worth, and all these things, until one day it was just unbearable, and I couldn't be myself in my marriage. I had to be this kind of eunuch to keep her safe, because that wound would keep showing up every time we'd try and be intimate, etc. And it eventually kind of smashed me to the point where I was dying, and I had to leave the marriage, and then I had to do these things like divorce, and it kind of smashed my world, and nobody in my family understood, but it was all stuff that couldn't be discussed. And That was 15 years. And I still look back and I try and figure out what I did wrong, or what I missed in choosing that experience, but there was nothing. And honestly, I can still say we love each other and we deeply respect each other, but it sure took me on a journey of self-exploration. But it also took me on a journey of how messed up relationships are, between men and women. Essentially, I married my mother. She had the same wound, and I responded to that. I guess I was attracted to that because I wanted to heal and fix a woman so that I could find myself and find my love again. And it got really complicated and messy. After that, it was like 3 years after my divorce. I thought I was going to just go out and solve all these sexual problems that were created through trying to love another. And I ended up meeting someone that was very sexual. It was the most amazing period of my life. But at the same time, the first time we met and she wanted to move forward in sexuality, and within the first 2 hours of our first sexuality, and it was the most amazing sexuality I'd ever had. It was like a 3-day weekend, and we never left the bed. But within a couple hours of us going to that level, the woman declared to me that she was going to sell everything and move 3 hours from where she was living to be with me, which was like, holy shit, what the hell's going on? And slowly over time, it became very clear that she didn't feel very supported in her life, and she wanted a father for her children. Her children didn't respect her, and she wanted me to fill that role. And it became clear, and we talked about it, and there was no way. I said right in that very moment, you're not moving in this period of time. We're going to need at least 6 months, maybe longer, just to get to know each other, setting some gentle boundaries for how this would proceed. But as time went on, I could feel she was trying to please me so that I'd finally take this responsibility from her. But at the same time, she spoke extremely badly of the father of her children, how he was a dope smoking asshole, and she spoke openly about this in front of her children, and it became very clear to me that she wasn't, the reason that her children weren't respecting her is she wasn't respecting their father. And the big circle happened, and there was no way I could ever fix that because we spoke about it at length, and she didn't want to acknowledge it. She just had a whole bunch of anger. And it was strange because the relationship on the sexuality side was very hot. She thought I was her twin flame and other things. And so we were meeting kind of an hour and a half drive from each side and doing these like 3-hour visits. And it was very hotly sexual and beautiful. But at the same time, I didn't know it was possible at the time, but I received a yeast infection from her. And I didn't even know what it was at the time, but it got so bad that it started to damage my equipment. Eventually, she came with me and we went to the doctor, and it was all very shaming. Like, she didn't want to take responsibility for it. And I can remember being in the pharmacy, and the pharmacist is yelling across the room that this product is for women only. Didn't you know that? And why is the doctor prescribing it? And it was so strong. And she didn't want to take any responsibility for her part in that. And she was going to put some Greek yogurt on it, and it was going to fix it. And she didn't want any part of the medicine. And I can talk about lots of things where she actually kind of forced her child up to me. The first time our children met, she had 2 children and I had 3, where she tried to get her son to ask me if he could call me dad, which was very jarring I'd only known her for about 2 months, but you could see the agenda and the other things, and I fully understand that she wanted the support and all those kind of things, but it became very clear that the reason for the relationship was to fill that need, but it wasn't discussed. It wasn't even asked. Uh, Anyways, it was a big mess. And then eventually one day, it was the hardest thing I ever did. But I don't know if you've ever tried to break up with a psychologist, but it's like a inversion. Uh, all the stories and trying to just say I got to move on and this isn't working out and all this kind of stuff, and then this got all switched back at me, and oh, what a horrible ending that it was. I tried everything to be loving and other things, but everything was turned back at me that I'd done something wrong and what's wrong with you and all these kind of things. But I can only say how vulnerable I was and how much I told her about my life and what was going on and how little she actually told me about what was going on with her. So I ended up kind of smashed at the end of that. And then I proceeded on, and I had some other really crazy experiences again. I met a couple women that were married and were in the process of separating, and I was very clear in my boundaries about not wanting to interact with them at a relationship level until they kind of clearly declared to their husband that they were moving out. And the first woman did not like that at all and made it all about me and the tone of my voice and how bad I was. And she called me out in one of the communities for something that wasn't even true, but she was in her anger and frustration, and it created this big explosion and affected my whole life over me just trying to stand in my boundaries, but this woman not wanting to be respectful. I don't break up families, and I don't harm other men and all this kind of stuff. And in the end, she ended up going through with it, but it was so crazy. And then I met another woman that, and after that one had to end because it was just so crazy, and she kind of destroyed my life and my reputation and a whole bunch of other things with things that weren't even true. But the next woman I met was through a yoga class, and it was beautiful. It was, once again, it was kind of hotly sexual and exciting and all this kind of stuff. But this was a different experience because this woman was being abused by her ex-husband. There was one time we met, and she had all these bruises on her arm, and she wasn't even aware. She'd been arrested by the police for abusing him, but she was so confused and the energy was so mangled up. It took hours and hours and hours to sit with her and talk her through. And we were in the shower, and I see these bruises on her arm, and then it was like, holy shit, he touched me first, and he grabbed me, and then I had to kick him in the balls and all this kind of stuff. But all that they could remember and all that the police were told is that she'd assaulted him. And we unwound all this and got her to speak to the police and all this kind of stuff. But as she kind of grew her power back towards her husband, things changed because, I don't know, it was very, very weird. I'm trying to interact with her and love her and all this kind of stuff. And she found this dominant man that she was paying to have experiences with, and she wanted me to be the same thing. And when I offered to do those things, I guess I didn't exert my dominance well enough or whatever, but it basically went to the point where all of a sudden she got so cold to me that she pushed me away, and that was the end. It was kind of like a summer experience, and it was all beautiful, but at the end I'm deeply confused. And then the last relationship that I had was with this older woman. She lived quite far from me near Vancouver. And she was a priestess and had all these connections with Egyptian gods and goddesses and all this kind of stuff. And she supported me through a whole bunch of really heavy stuff that I went through. I was trying to be evicted out of my house. And we spent months talking and had these beautiful sexual experiences. This was a woman that was as old as my mother at that time. And she had a bunch of self-worth issues as well, but it was beautiful. And we went through a whole bunch of stuff until I was getting close to the end of dealing with the legal battle for my the place I was trying to be evicted by my landlord, and he was just an asshole. And she was sitting with me and helping me support. But when she found out that I was trying to move, she tried to coerce me into building a place that had a basement suite for her so she could move in with me. But that was never an agreement, and it got really messy. And she started to get very insecure, and holy shit, I can remember the things she was just like tearing at me. I can remember having a verbal fight with her, and she was tearing at me. I could feel the claws just like tearing at me, and I was just in a new awareness phase where I could just sit and I could hear the pain and the suffering and the her trying to destroy me with her words, because she was suffering from her childhood. Some of the things she told me were kind of bad. She was abused as a child, and I guess in the southern U.S. in Atlanta or whatever, sex isn't considered sex unless there's penetration. And she, as a child, was asked to service her uncles and the men in her family, and it left this deep wound in her. And I held so much space, and I listened, and then she got to that point where she was so angry and she was tearing at me, and I literally got to the point where I had to protect myself. I can remember hearing what she was saying and receiving it and then echoing it back to her, and I was almost numb inside. And I'm finally setting some boundaries. I said, you can't talk to me like that. This is awful, and you can't scream at me like that or blame me or say these lies or whatever was happening. And I remember it happened 3 times, and I started to get to the point where I said, finally, I just can't stand this anymore. It was leveling on an abuse. She wasn't hitting, but her words were tearing at me so heavily from her pain. And I tried to hold space, and I tried to hold space, and then I finally had to set some boundaries. And I said, if this keeps on, you're going to destroy our relationship, and I can't continue. And I remember she was visiting me at the time, and finally I had to send her home. She was there, and I just couldn't be in the physical space with her. And we had a discussion, and I helped pay her flight ticket back so she could be at home. And I was in the process of moving, and I remember having 2 or 3 more conversations on the phone, and it was just like pushing me away so hard and smashing me and making it impossible to talk. And finally I just had to say, okay, this has to be complete, and I love you, and if you can find a time and a place where you won't like just physically hurt me in our discussions, then maybe we can reconnect. And she didn't like that. I found out afterwards that she phoned up all her friends and once again told a whole bunch of lies about me, which weren't true. And then she cursed me, like literally sent snakes from Sekhmet and Set and all this kind of stuff. And I had all these, like on my pubic area or whatever, I had these like zits that were swollen, and it was like I'd been bitten. And finally, through working through some healers and other things, I found out that this has happened, and I had to remove the curse. And I got to the end of all this, and it was just like, I've loved so deeply, and I've tried to connect, and I have a very open heart, and I tried to find love by meeting these wounds and holding space for them and other things. And I was so smashed by it. I got to the point where I wasn't even worthy of relationship anymore, or being able to be seen and to be cursed afterwards for holding space and having to set a boundary and step back. I wasn't even abusive, or I wasn't even angry. I can remember just being so quiet and clear and just feeling and receiving all these wounds that weren't mine, and the projection from her past, and trying to hold space but not knowing how to hold space, or her even accepting what was going on. And I look back, and all my relationships had some facet of this, where I was just kind of loved and opened my heart and tried to be vulnerable at all times or whatever, and then that was always received this pain coming back, and this permission to feel their pain so that I could somehow interact with them, and it smashed me. And then it put all these self-doubt things into me, because why was all this stuff coming to me, and why was I being asked to hold space for people that didn't want in the end, or didn't have the ability to hold space? And I just kept opening and opening and opening, and each time these things, they should have smashed me and made me stop, but they smashed my heart, and then I got bigger and I got more open. But now I'm sitting here trying to be back in relationship, to call in beloveds and all this kind of stuff, and all these, I don't know what I want to call it, unworthinesses keep showing up. Like, why did I deserve that? Why is that what I called in? And I can see reflections of my mother relationship and her wounds, and how that got into me as a child. And it kind of left me kind of like, the only way I could feel loved was just to be wide open and not have boundaries, and just accept whatever showed up, and to be happy with what little I got. And I'm sitting here now, and I'm just like in this pain and this sorrow of, this is so much of what relationship is, from both men and women's perspectives. And I'm not blaming, but holy shit, I saw the dark side of a lot of pain and wounds and suffering in my experience. And I'm sure women have had their same experiences of men being this way. But I'm just sitting at the end of it, and it's just like, what a tangled mess. Why did we go through all this? Was this even relationship? Was this just not suffering combined with other people that suffer? And how it pulled our hearts apart, and how it pulled and smashed us and made us question everything, and having no ability to fix or help or control. And it's not about that or whatever, but what do you do when this person's suffering, and they're lashing out at you and are trying to hurt you over things that aren't even your own, and then you're trying to step back and see the bigger picture, and see the why, and see, but all I see is suffering and pain, and people being smashed by their past relationships, and insecurities, and just suffering. I just feel this heaviness in my heart, and I just want to cry, just to wash away what was, and to no longer have to be in those crazy stories, or to protect myself, and I know women do this too, but trying to figure out if this is a safe place, or if this is a person I can really open my heart to, or is this somebody that has a wound, and now we're going to have to sit in that wound and suffer. And I held so much space so many times, thinking I could help that person get through, but when they don't want to get through, or they don't want to recognize that they're in pain or suffering, it just makes two suffer. I don't know how else to describe it. It just becomes this mess. And I'm sitting here, and I didn't do anything wrong to cause these things. These things happened when I was a child, and to make me feel only worthy to women that were having pain. It just me trying to fix my mom, and I've learned this stuff now, and I'm sitting and now trying to surrender all this, and be able to be a confident man again, and be a loving man, and to be light for other people, but I have to speak about this and get this out and move forward in love again. And oh, I love myself so much. I've been sitting and holding my heart tonight and just sending love, and but all these wounds and all these scars and all these sufferings are just sitting there trying to squash me and make me unworthy and make me question myself. And only by releasing it through talking, I felt this might feel uncomfortable for a lot of people. But I had to. It was just called. I'm just laying here and trying to let this off my chest. And why did it all happen? And is that all I deserved? And I'm such a loving person and such a beautiful, open heart. So I'm letting it go right now and letting go of all these crazy, demented experiences of trying to be loved and love. And I know it's not me, and I know it's part of the experience, and it's part of making me grow and making me open and making me love myself. But I was just telling God, like, fuck, this is so demented, and who would ever want to have experiences like this over and over and over again, all because we're cleaning up the lineage, we're cleaning up the trauma, we're cleaning up the past. And then to have to question yourself and not be sure of yourself, and have to look at all this dark stuff that much of it wasn't even mine. Just to be a loving man, to be a loving partner, to be a loving husband, to be a loving dad. And I'm really having trouble seeing the light and the love in all of this, but I know I did my best. Despite all that suffering and that pain and the projections that were going on, I always supported and did my best until I had to step away and love myself. And those choices to love myself were the hardest things in my life, but I'm sure glad I did, because where they were leading would have just been more pain and suffering. So I'm offering this as an open, vulnerable share to anybody that wants to listen, of my experience as a man, of my experience of trying to be loved, of sitting with the wounds of those I tried to love, and trying to be the best I could so that I could feel safe myself, not have to be just the safety for the other. It makes me so feel like I want to vomit in some regards, and I guess I'm letting that go. I've tried to be as self-respectful and respectful of the woman that I talked about here in this share. I thank them. I thank every single one of them for what I had, and I forgive them, and I forgive myself in all of this, and I just ask to be free so that I can finally, in loving myself, be loved by another or share love with another. Just a simplicity and an ease and a grace where we each own our shit and we'll accept help when our shit shows up or needs to show up. But is in loving respect, and doesn't have to be about wounds anymore, or healing or fixing or any of that stuff, but just about owning our stuff and talking about it and being real about it, and then moving through it so that it doesn't replay. I love myself. I love Paul. And I love women. And I want better. And I choose it now. That's my declaration, I guess, is to release all my past and all that painful experience, because it taught me, so that I can now live and love and be the light for somebody that wants to be the light for me. I call in my beloved. I call in those beautiful, loving relationships that I haven't supposedly been worthy of so far, and I step up, and I welcome women to step up, and I hope for better for us all, creating a new world where no longer the suffering and these entangled relationship bullshits exist. So we can have a better life, and we can interact with others and love their children and love their families, and move past all this past suffering bullshit, these epigenetic lineage traumas and embedded traumas and church traumas and all these kind of things that have just made it impossible to love another without entanglement. So I love you all, and thank you for listening. Thank you for witnessing. I set myself free. I invite you to set yourself free. Thank you for all you've done and everything you've experienced. Let's be free. I love you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This was hard. Thank you for listening. See you soon.